The early morning sun glared off the sprawling U.S. military training grounds, casting long, harsh shadows across the dust-strewn terrain. General Hale, a man whose reputation for arrogance preceded him, strode briskly along the perimeter, his polished boots kicking up fine clouds of sand with each sharp step. He was a commanding presence, his broad shoulders, crisp uniform, and cold, hawk-like eyes making him both respected and feared. Yet beneath the facade of control, his temper simmered like a hidden wildfire. Today was an exercise, but in Hale's mind, every drill was a test of obedience and discipline. Corporal knelt beside a young soldier lying on the ground, his uniform streaked with dirt and blood from a simulated injury. Her gloved hands moved with precision, wrapping bandages around the soldier's arm, her calm voice issuing instructions and encouragement. Despite her youth, had seen more battlefield scenarios than most soldiers twice her age, her steady demeanor born of necessity and rigorous training. She was meticulous, methodical, and fiercely competent, traits that had earned her the quiet respect of her peers, but also the scorn of the general. Hale's sharp gaze fell on her from across the training yard. His lips curled into a thin, imperious line. "Why is this taking so long?" he barked suddenly, his voice cutting through the morning air like a whip. Soldiers instinctively froze, the tension palpable, didn't flinch, continuing her work on the simulated wound, assessing the soldier's vitals, keeping her movements smooth and controlled. To Hale, her composure seemed defiant. His ego bristled at the perceived insubordination. "You're wasting time, Corporal," he snapped, marching toward her, each stride deliberate and intimidating. Soldiers around them instinctively stepped back, creating a wide berth around the confrontation. Hale's reputation for brutality preceded him. His explosive temper and willingness to humiliate subordinates were notorious. Many had witnessed his wrath from a safe distance, and few dared approach him directly, yet met his gaze without flinching. "I'm following protocol, sir," she said evenly, her voice calm but firm. Her tone didn't waver, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that in moments like these, clarity and confidence could be the difference between chaos and control. Her hands continued their work, finishing the bandage with meticulous care. Soldiers watched, admiration growing silently. Her courage was quiet, yet impossible to ignore. Hale's face reddened, veins bulging at his temples. "Protocol doesn't save lives if you're slow," he barked, stepping closer, the weight of authority pressing down like a physical force. Rose slightly to meet his eyes, her posture controlled, not aggressive but unmistakably assertive. There was a calm in her stance that suggested not fearlessness born of ignorance, but a calculated bravery rooted in experience. The surrounding soldiers shifted uneasily. They were trained to obey orders, yes, but they also recognized competence when they saw it. Hale's aggression was growing more erratic, and the tension in the air thickened, each second stretching like a taut wire ready to snap. Whispered murmurs rippled through the unit, everyone sensing the danger yet uncertain how it might unfold. Some glanced toward the safety of their vehicles, others toward cover behind nearby training obstacles, all eyes alternating between Hale and. Hale's hand tightened around the grip of his sidearm, his jaw set in a menacing line. His reputation was built on domination, on bending others to his will, and he could not tolerate being challenged, especially not by a junior officer and certainly not by a woman he perceived as overly cautious. Calm composure was, to him, a provocation. He had faced soldiers who feared him, who flinched at his voice, but she stood still, unshaken, unafraid, and it enraged him beyond reason. His mind raced as she gauged the situation. Every instinct screamed danger. She noted Hale's posture, the way his foot shifted impatiently, his eyes darting with barely controlled fury. She calculated distances, potential cover, and escape paths. Her experience as a medic had taught her to remain calm under fire, to prioritize both life and tactical advantage. And though this was no live firefight, the danger was as real as any battlefield scenario. Hale took a deliberate step closer, the metal of his sidearm glinting in the harsh sunlight. "I said move faster," he barked, the fury in his voice carrying across the grounds. Soldiers flinched collectively. remained seated for a heartbeat longer, assessing, waiting, preparing. She rose, standing her ground but subtly shifting to position herself near a low wall that offered partial cover. Her movements were fluid, unhurried, precise, a clear signal that she was aware of every potential outcome. Around them, the air seemed to pulse with anticipation. The other soldiers were frozen in place, caught between instinct and discipline. Hale's expression darkened further, his arrogance fueling a sense of invincibility. He believed authority alone made him untouchable, but composure challenged that notion silently, her every measured movement and calm breath a counterpoint to his rage. The general's impatience reached its peak. His fingers twitched on the trigger of his sidearm as he barked another order, sharp and uncontrolled. The tension in the training yard had escalated to a point of near electricity, each participant aware that the next moment could change everything. Soldiers held their breath, unsure whether Hale would physically act, and if so, how would respond. And then Hale did the unthinkable. In a surge of unrestrained anger, he raised his sidearm, aimed near, and fired 4 rounds into the ground just inches from her. The deafening reports shattered the morning's fragile calm. Dust and pebbles erupted around her, and soldiers instinctively dove for cover, hearts hammering in terror. Crouched instinctively, her pulse racing but her mind sharp, calculating. Every sense was heightened, every movement deliberate. For the first time, the quiet tension of protocol transformed into immediate, life-threatening danger. Gaze flicked to the general, to the surrounding soldiers, and back to the terrain. Every instinct screamed survival, but unlike others who would panic, his mind worked with crystalline clarity. She knew the importance of calmness, control, and strategy, and she understood that in this moment, courage and precision were her only allies. The soldiers around her were frozen, unsure whether to intervene, unsure whether to flee. Hale's fury filled the air, a palpable force, yet its focus remained absolute. She was a calm eye in a storm of fear, the center of a growing tension that threatened to erupt into catastrophe. And as Hale's chest heaved with rage, silently prepared to act, not with aggression but with the intelligence, skill, and courage that had defined her entire military career. In that instant, time seemed suspended. The entire training ground held its breath. The arrogant general, convinced of his dominance, and the calm, determined medic, poised for survival, faced each other across the distance of a single, fragile battlefield. Every soldier present sensed it. Something unprecedented was about to happen, and no one yet knew how it would end. The 4 gunshots rang out like thunder across the training grounds, startling birds from nearby trees and sending a ripple of shock through the assembled soldiers. Dust and gravel erupted from the points where the bullets had struck, scattering underfoot like jagged sparks. Soldiers dropped to the ground instinctively, their hearts hammering in terror. Some pressed faces into dirt and sand, others clutched weapons with trembling hands. Yet among them remained unusually calm, her mind focused with the precision of a battlefield surgeon. Every instinct screamed danger, but every calculation screamed opportunity. His eyes flicked rapidly across the yard, analyzing every movement, every shadow, every potential obstacle. General Hale stood not 5 feet away, chest heaving, fingers still tight around his weapon. His face was red with fury, veins standing out like cords across his temples. The metallic gleam of his sidearm caught the sunlight, a cruel reminder of the authority and the threat he represented. The young soldiers nearby dared not move, paralyzed by the sight of their commanding officer firing into the ground so close to one of their own. "Down, everyone down," hissed, her voice sharp but controlled. It wasn't a command born of fear, but one born of strategy. She shifted her stance slightly, pressing herself against a low wall while keeping her head low. Her heart pounded in her chest, yet she maintained composure, her breathing steady. Years of battlefield experience had taught her that panic was the enemy. Strategy, patience, and calculated action were the only tools that could survive a confrontation like this. Hale stomped forward, pointing the weapon aggressively, his voice a raw, furious bellow. "I won't tolerate insubordination. Move faster, medic." His words were meant to intimidate, to assert dominance, but they only highlighted his volatility. Soldiers, trained to follow orders without hesitation, were frozen in a mix of fear and confusion. The surreal spectacle, the general firing rounds mere inches from one of his own medics, was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Whispers and stifled gasps ran through the unit, tension thickening with each passing second. His mind raced, calculating options. A head-on confrontation was suicide. Retreat was unnecessary. She noted the uneven terrain, the scattered obstacles, and the positions of her fellow soldiers. Hale's arrogance was his weakness. He assumed fear was absolute, that no one could challenge him, that his rank equated to invincibility. Resolve hardened. She would not allow the general's recklessness to endanger her or the unit. Her survival depended on exploiting his assumptions, using intelligence and composure as her weapon. The medic subtly shifted her weight, signaling to nearby soldiers to remain calm and maintain positions without drawing attention. Their eyes met hers, a silent acknowledgement of trust and leadership. They were inspired, not by rank, but by competence and courage. In that moment, became more than a medic, she became a beacon of calculated calm amidst chaos, a strategist navigating a human battlefield fraught with fear and unpredictability. Hale, in contrast, was blinded by anger, moving aggressively without considering consequences. Hale barked another command, his voice cracking with fury. "I said move, now!" His pistol remained raised and his movements grew increasingly erratic. Soldiers instinctively pressed into cover, some shielding their eyes from the sun and the blazing anger of the general. Observed his every action, the tremor in his fingers, the sway in his stance, the way his ego dictated every movement. She noted these details with clinical precision, planning her next steps. This confrontation was no longer just about compliance. It was a test of wits, timing, and nerve. Thoughts flickered to the wounded soldier she had been tending moments ago. Though it had been a training scenario, the stakes suddenly felt terrifyingly real. The young man lay pressed against the ground, wide-eyed, frozen in fear. Knew that to protect him and the other soldiers, she had to regain control, not through aggression but through measured, decisive action. Her fingers brushed the small utility knife strapped to her thigh, a standard piece of medic equipment, considering how she might use it to create a distraction if necessary. Hale's movements became more unpredictable. He raised the weapon again, gesturing wildly, shouting incoherently about obedience and discipline. Yet in his fury, he failed to notice the subtle, almost imperceptible maneuvers of and the soldiers around her. She slowly positioned herself closer to a concrete barricade, partially shielding herself while observing escape routes and tactical advantages. The general's focus was entirely on intimidation, his perception narrow, his arrogance blinding him to the potential for consequences. Time seemed to stretch. Every second felt like an hour. The soldiers around were silent, waiting for a cue they feared to give or take. And yet's calm was magnetic. Her quiet authority was more compelling than Hale's explosive dominance. Her eyes met his, unwavering. She didn't speak, yet her presence communicated an unspoken warning. Misjudgment could be fatal. The general's rage had shifted from calculated discipline to unpredictable fury, and stillness became the pivot upon which the entire scenario teetered. Then a small but crucial sound caught Hale off guard. The faint click of a magazine latch, the shifting weight of a soldier preparing to move for cover. For the first time, the general's gaze flickered, had subtly manipulated the tension, creating doubt in his mind without raising her voice. She wasn't challenging him outright. She was asserting control in a way that only a trained medic with battlefield experience could. The soldiers, sensing her calm dominance, drew confidence from her presence, their fear tempered by admiration. The general's fury spiked, but his attention was divided. Took another careful, measured step toward a position of slight advantage, maintaining eye contact while signaling silently for the soldiers to remain still. Her strategy was simple but effective. Survive, maintain authority, and exploit his arrogance. Every movement, every breath, every shift of weight was deliberate. She was no longer simply reacting. She was controlling the battlefield with intellect, patience, and courage. The training yard, once a place of routine exercises, had transformed into a tense arena of psychological warfare. Soldiers held their breaths, watching the silent chess match unfold between the medic and the general. Hale, blinded by pride and rage, underestimated his opponent's capability, unaware that his position was no longer secure. His calm composure radiated, slowly shifting the energy in the air. Fear still lingered, but respect began to emerge, subtle but undeniable, as those present realized that this confrontation would not end as expected. And in that suspended moment, with dust swirling around spent rounds and adrenaline electrifying the air, prepared to act. Not out of aggression, not out of anger, but out of intelligence, courage, and survival instinct. The general, arrogant and unyielding, had fired the first shots, but he had yet to realize that the true battle, fought with skill and calm resolve, had only just begun. Crouched behind the low concrete wall, dust settling around her like a fine gray haze. The echoes of the 4 shots still reverberated through the training grounds, mingling with the pounding of her own heartbeat. Every instinct screamed danger, but her mind remained clear, razor-sharp. Years of battlefield experience had conditioned her to remain calm under extreme pressure, to observe, calculate, and act with precision. This was no ordinary training day. Hale's rage had escalated beyond protocol. She knew she was facing not just arrogance but lethal unpredictability. Survival would demand intelligence, patience, and courage. Her gaze swept the yard. The general's chest heaved as he barked orders, his fury radiating like heat from the pavement. His fingers twitched on the trigger, the metal glinting dangerously in the morning sun. Soldiers pressed themselves against barriers, eyes wide with fear, some whispering quiet prayers. Noted their positions, recognizing that any sudden movement could trigger chaos or casualties. She signaled subtly with a flick of her gloved hand, instructing them to remain calm and follow her lead. In moments like these, leadership wasn't about rank. It was about composure, clarity, and trust. His mind worked like a tactical computer. She assessed cover points, escape routes, and the general's likely movements. Hale was predictable in his unpredictability. His ego demanded domination, yet his overconfidence blinded him to subtle threats. She noted his foot tapping against the gravel, the twitch of his jaw, the rapid shift of his eyes scanning the yard. He believed fear controlled the battlefield, but knew that intelligence and patience could neutralize even the most violent aggression. Every second she waited increased her chances of regaining control. The wounded soldier she had tended earlier lay nearby, pale-faced and trembling. She pressed a reassuring hand to his shoulder, offering a brief, grounding smile. "Stay calm," she whispered, her tone gentle but firm. "Follow my lead and you'll be fine." He nodded shakily, clinging to her presence like a lifeline. The other soldiers mirrored his attention, their fear tempered by her steady demeanor. It was a subtle, yet powerful influence. His composure radiated authority, even to those who were senior in rank but less skilled in calm under pressure. Hale, oblivious to her growing control of the situation, paced in uneven circles, pointing his weapon and shouting threats. "I will not tolerate insubordination. Move faster, medic." His voice cracked, exposing both rage and uncertainty. Soldiers ducked instinctively, their focus on avoiding the barrel of his sidearm rather than following his orders. Seized this moment of distraction. She shifted slightly, positioning herself at a better angle behind the wall, minimizing exposure while maximizing her field of vision. Every micro-movement was deliberate, every breath measured. Her thoughts flickered to contingencies. If Hale advanced recklessly, she could create a distraction using the environment, loose gravel, training equipment, even her utility knife as a last resort signaling tool. If the soldiers panicked, she would guide them with subtle hand signals, ensuring their safety. She considered speaking, but words might provoke the general further. Silence, patience, and observation were her allies. Her entire training and experience had led to this moment. where survival hinged on intellect and poise rather than force. Hale's arrogance continued to work against him. He assumed everyone present was paralyzed by fear, that no one could possibly challenge his authority. Exploited this assumption. She allowed her gaze to remain steady on him, her posture composed yet alert. The soldiers, witnessing her calm, began to mirror her composure, their initial panic easing into quiet attention. She realized that control wasn't just about her actions. It was about setting the emotional tone of the entire unit. Fear could be contagious, but so could calm determination. The general's unpredictability made the situation dangerous, but saw it as an opportunity. His rage would lead him to missteps. She noted the distance between him and the nearest obstacles, calculating where a miscalculated step could unbalance him or provide her leverage. Every twitch of his body was data. Every barked order was a signal. Felt a strange clarity, a mix of adrenaline and professional focus that made her hyper-aware. She understood that action had to be precise, deliberate, and unhesitating when the moment arrived. The soldiers around her watched silently, their respect for her growing with each second of unflinching courage. Some whispered under their breath, awe in their voices, noting how a medic, often underestimated, held the and most commanding presence on the field. Silent leadership had shifted the dynamics. The general's intimidation had lost its edge. She had become the anchor, the pivot around which the battlefield's tension now swirled. Hale's rage was still powerful, but it was losing its control over those he thought were beneath him. Took a slow, deliberate breath, centering herself. She knew that a single misstep could turn the situation deadly. Her training as a medic had prepared her for life-or-death scenarios, but this was different. It was a psychological battlefield layered with physical danger. She needed to manipulate the general's perception without escalating the threat, guiding him into a position where his aggression could be contained. Patience was key. Impulsive action would play into his hands. Her eyes flicked to the perimeter. Vehicles, barriers, and debris formed a rough map of potential maneuvers. She visualized the positions of every soldier, every object, every escape route. She considered how Hale's arrogance would influence his next move, predictably rash, overly confident, and vulnerable. And she also considered the consequences if he noticed her positioning too soon. Timing was everything. Every thought was deliberate, and every action calculated. Survival and control were inseparable. The general barked again, his voice cracking, each word a mix of fury and disbelief. "Do you think you can defy me? Are you stupid?" Didn't respond verbally. She didn't need to. Her stance, her calm, her calculated silence were more powerful than any retort. Hale's misperception of dominance created a psychological advantage she intended to exploit. The soldiers watched, understanding that was not simply avoiding danger. She was preparing for a controlled, decisive response that could neutralize the threat entirely. Time slowed as weighed her options. Her every nerve was alert, every sense heightened. Dust clung to her uniform, the smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. Her eyes tracked Hale's every movement, cataloging each potential risk and opportunity. A sense of inevitability filled her. This confrontation would not end with the general asserting dominance. She would act, and when she did, the outcome would shift dramatically. The tension in the yard was almost unbearable, but its resolve never wavered. She was calm, precise, and ready. The soldiers around her adjusted their positions slightly, taking cues from her subtle gestures. Leadership was unspoken but absolute. Hale's explosive energy had created chaos, but it had also exposed vulnerabilities. She sensed it instinctively. His overconfidence and rage made him predictable in ways a normal observer could not see. Every movement he made was an opening, every shout a signal. His hidden resolve, the quiet strength cultivated through years of training, experience, and discipline, would guide her actions when the moment came to strike. And in that moment, as the sun climbed higher and shadows stretched across the dusty ground, became more than a medic. She became the calm at the center of a storm, the strategist in a battlefield of human ego, and the quiet force that would turn fear into opportunity. The general's arrogance had set the stage, but intelligence, patience, and courage were about to take control. What had started as a terrifying confrontation was evolving into a meticulously calculated showdown. General Hale's anger had reached a fever pitch. His chest heaved, and the veins in his neck throbbed as he moved erratically across the dusty training grounds, brandishing his sidearm with all the authority his rank demanded. To him, the world was simple. Obedience equaled survival, fear equaled control, and anyone who dared challenge that order deserved correction. Yet in his growing fury, he failed to notice the subtle shifts around him, the slight repositioning of soldiers, the quiet adjustments of weight and stance, and most importantly, the calm, calculating presence of. Remained low behind the concrete barrier, her breathing steady, her eyes locked on the general. Every muscle in her body was coiled, not with panic but with awareness. She had studied Hale's movements, his packing, the twitch of his hand, the angle at which he gripped his weapon. Arrogance blinded him, but experience sharpened her instincts. In the moments since the 4 rounds had cracked through the air, she had assumed a position of tactical advantage without drawing attention. Each subtle motion she made was deliberate, calculated to avoid provoking him while setting the stage for control. Around them, the soldiers watched with a mix of awe and fear. Hale's reputation for brutality was well-earned. Few had ever seen him so openly volatile, and yet his calm radiated authority that transcended rank. Her silence, her composure, and the precision of her movements communicated a message louder than any gunshot. She was unshakable, prepared, and entirely aware of the battlefield dynamics. The young medic's presence began to influence the morale of the soldiers, subtly challenging Hale's dominance without a single word. Hale barked another series of commands, but they fell on ears now partially attuned to his guidance rather than his threats. "Move, now!" His voice cracked, the strain of unrestrained anger evident. Soldiers instinctively ducked or shifted for cover, but they also began to follow subtle cues, slight hand signals, body orientation, and eye contact that instructed them when to remain still and when to act. Influence grew even as Hale's authority faltered, a quiet force counterbalancing the general's chaos. The medic assessed her surroundings rapidly. The training ground was strewn with obstacles, metal barricades, sandbags, vehicle remnants, and equipment crates. Each could serve as cover, each could serve as leverage. Hale's unpredictability was dangerous, but his overconfidence was exploitable. His mind calculated the physics of the space, the distance to the general, the angles of potential attack, the likelihood of missteps from a man who assumed dominance was guaranteed. Her role as a medic had trained her for life-or-death situations, but her mind had also been honed to strategy and observation, skills she now applied with lethal precision. Hale advanced thinking that sheer aggression would force compliance. He underestimated its intelligence and composure. "Do you think I won't act? Do you think your calmness makes you untouchable?" he growled, the pistol still leveled at her. Soldiers instinctively pressed themselves closer to cover, tense, ready to react to any sudden escalation. Eyes, however, remained on him without fear. She didn't flinch, didn't respond verbally, and didn't overreact. Every movement was subtle, every breath deliberate. Her composure became a mirror to his anger, reflecting control in a way he had not anticipated. She considered her options carefully. Engaging him directly could provoke a violent reaction. Doing nothing could embolden him further. Her solution lay in controlled provocation, exposing his miscalculations without triggering him to fire. Shifted slightly, leaning into a shadow, angling her stance to minimize exposure while creating opportunities for leverage. Hale's gaze, narrow and focused, followed her every move, yet he remained oblivious to the slow but steady control she was asserting over the battlefield. Around them, the soldiers began to murmur quietly, glances flicking between Hale and respect began to replace fear. The general's dominance, once absolute, now seemed fragile in the face of her unyielding composure. Had become the pivot point of authority, her calm a counterweight to his escalating rage. The very air seemed charged, electric with tension, as if the outcome of this confrontation rested solely on her next moves. Hale, blinded by arrogance, failed to recognize the subtle shifts in balance. His aggression was predictable, his impatience made him reckless. Exploited this instinctively, adjusting her position again, a slight step that placed her in a tactical zone where she could monitor his movements while remaining protected. She noted the potential for him to overextend, for a misstep to create a crucial opening. Her calculations were precise, her awareness total. She had created a scenario in which his dominance could be neutralized without violence if she timed her actions correctly. The general's voice rose, a harsh and erratic crescendo. "Do you think calmness will save you? You think intelligence can outmatch rank?" Hale's fury was loud, commanding, and destructive, but the soldiers, inspired by steady presence, were no longer entirely under his spell. She had become the unseen anchor, the silent strategist, guiding both action and morale through presence alone. Fear still lingered, but it was now tempered by recognition of skill and courage, qualities Hale had dismissed entirely. Prepared for the critical moment when a decisive move would shift the balance completely, she reviewed contingencies in her mind: distraction, redirection, subtle leverage, and positioning. Her goal was simple yet profound: neutralize the immediate threat while avoiding unnecessary escalation. Every action was planned with precision. Her training as a medic, her battlefield experience, and her calm resolve converged into a single point of clarity. She was ready. Time seemed to stretch. Dust hung in the air, stirred by Hale's packing glinting in the sunlight. Soldiers held their breath, waiting for the inevitable clash of authority and intelligence. Hale, consumed by ego, failed to notice the subtle but undeniable shift. Composure had begun to dominate the psychological field. Every soldier instinctively recognized that the outcome of this encounter no longer rested solely on rank, but on intellect, courage, and calculated action. The tension reached a peak when Hale suddenly advanced, weapon raised, expecting immediate submission. Poised and calm, held her ground, her mind analyzing, predicting, and preparing. She would not panic. She would not be intimidated. The general's arrogance had created an opening, and she was ready to exploit it at precisely the right moment. In that frozen, charged instant, the balance of power was about to tilt, and the entire unit sensed that the decisive moment, when calm would confront rage, was approaching. The medic who had been underestimated by everyone became the silent architect of control. Hale's dominance had been challenged not through aggression but through intelligence, patience, and composure. The story of this confrontation, though still unfolding, had already begun to rewrite the rules of authority, courage, and respect within the unit. And as the general's chest heaved and the sun glinted off his pistol, prepared for the moment that would decide everything. The dusty training ground seemed to hold their breath. Soldiers crouched behind obstacles, clutching weapons, their eyes darting between the furious general and the calm, composed medic. General Hale's chest heaved, and the sweat on his brow reflected the harsh sunlight. His voice cracked, punctuated by shouts and threats, but the authority he believed he commanded was slipping. Had remained perfectly still for nearly a minute, her breathing measured, her focus unwavering. She wasn't reacting to fear, she was orchestrating her next moves, with the precision of a seasoned battlefield strategist. Hale's arrogance had blinded him. He assumed obedience, assumed fear, assumed submission, but had already recognized the cracks in his dominance. Her eyes scanned the yard, noting every detail: the uneven pavement, the scattered equipment, the position of every soldier, and most importantly, Hale's overconfidence. Each twitch of his hand, each stride he took without caution, created an opportunity. She understood that control did not come from weapons alone. It came from awareness, timing, and influence. Hale had created the battlefield, but she was about to control it. Shifted slightly, using a concrete barrier for partial cover. Her movements were subtle, deliberate, calculated to avoid provoking him while positioning herself for maximum advantage. The soldiers nearby noticed, instinctively following her cues. Her calmness was infectious, transforming fear into cautious confidence. Whispers ran through the ranks. "She's not panicking. She knows what she's doing." even in the midst of Hale's explosive fury, had become the focal point of authority, not through rank, but through intelligence and courage. Hale took another step forward, pointing his pistol directly at her. "Do you think you can outsmart me?" he bellowed. His voice echoed across the yard, cracking with rage. Soldiers flinched, pressing closer to cover, expecting the general to fire again. However, remained composed. Her eyes never left his, unwavering calm, yet filled with the silent intensity of someone who knew exactly what to do next. She wasn't pleading, negotiating, or panicking. She was preparing to neutralize the threat. Her mind worked rapidly. The general's aggression was predictable, rash, arrogant, and reliant on intimidation. Had to exploit this predictability without escalating to lethal confrontation. She considered her tools, positioning, the terrain, her own body language, and the soldiers she subtly guided. She knew that direct challenge could provoke him into firing, but carefully timed maneuvering could shift the balance entirely. Every second she waited, every subtle movement she made, was calculated to draw him into a psychological trap. The soldiers around her began to notice small changes in Hale's posture. His steps were uneven, his gestures sharp but increasingly hesitant. Recognized the pattern. His rage was consuming him, but it was also leaving openings. She adjusted her stance, signaling silently to the unit to remain calm, avoid sudden movements, and focus on their surroundings. Her leadership didn't need words. The soldiers followed instinctively, trusting her judgment and composure even in the face of unprecedented chaos. Hale, meanwhile, misinterpreted her silence as submission or perhaps indecision. He puffed his chest and stepped closer, trying to reassert control. "I am in charge here," he shouted, the words barely masking his frustration. Eyes locked with his, unblinking. She didn't retreat. She didn't shout. She simply held her ground, projecting an unshakable calm that contrasted sharply with his fiery unpredictability. Her quiet dominance began to undermine his authority in ways he hadn't anticipated. The soldiers sensed it. Whispers of admiration and hope began to weave through the ranks. Then made her first calculated move. She shifted laterally, sliding slightly along the concrete barrier, creating a subtle angle that blocked his line of sight while allowing her full view of his movements. Hale's eyes darted to follow her, but the shift was so small, so precise, that he didn't perceive the strategic significance. His body language was deliberate, calm, controlled, yet assertive. She had positioned herself in a spot where she could manipulate his attention, preparing for a decisive action that would neutralize his threat. Hale's arrogance grew, unaware that he was walking into a trap of perception and timing. "I will not be disrespected," he shouted, raising his pistol higher, threatening the entire area. Soldiers instinctively ducked, but had trained them to anticipate moves, to stay composed, to trust her guidance. She subtly directed them with hand signals, keeping their focus and positioning optimal. The moment wasn't yet for action. This was the orchestration, the setup, the subtle control of battlefield psychology. Hale's rage provided the opening. Her patience created the advantage. A loose piece of gravel shifted under Hale's boot, catching his attention. Noticed it immediately. The general's movements became slightly more erratic, his stance unbalanced. In another second, his weight shifted too far forward, forcing him to step awkwardly. His mind registered the opportunity. She didn't rush. She waited for him to overcommit, knowing that the next subtle maneuver could force him into a compromised position without him even realizing it. Her patience was her weapon, her observation her shield. Soldiers, watching silently, were riveted. They realized that wasn't merely surviving. She was controlling the encounter, subtly, invisibly, without firing a single shot. Her intelligence, courage, and composure had created a turning point. Hale's overconfidence, previously his greatest strength, was now his greatest weakness. Every erratic movement, every shout, every threat played into her strategy. The general, so used to absolute obedience and fear, could not anticipate a calm, measured opponent. Then came the moment of subtle confrontation. Stepped forward, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension like a blade. "General Hale," she said, measured, steady, Your actions endanger everyone here, including yourself. You've crossed a line. If you fire again, you will answer for it, and I will make sure no one is harmed because of your recklessness." Her words weren't defiant for the sake of ego. They were precise, calculated, and undeniable. Hale froze, the pistol lowering slightly, surprise flickering across his face. The soldiers around them exchanged glances. The silence that followed was palpable, a collective breath held in suspense. Words had shifted the dynamic. She had taken the initiative without aggression. Hale's arrogance faltered, replaced by confusion. He had never encountered someone who could confront him calmly, assertively, and strategically in the face of imminent danger. His presence and intelligence had turned the tide, creating a psychological dominance that rivaled his physical authority. Time seemed suspended as Hale assessed the situation, realizing he was no longer in total control. Calm had infected the entire unit. Fear no longer dictated behavior. Soldiers rose slightly from cover, emboldened by her example. Hale's chest heaved, rage simmering but restrained. Had exploited his overconfidence, his predictable aggression, and his failure to recognize skill as a form of power. In that charged, electric moment, she prepared for the next critical step, one that would shift the balance completely. Once underestimated, now held the upper hand in a confrontation that had begun with sheer terror. Her patience, intelligence, and courage had neutralized the initial chaos, creating a scenario where the arrogant general could no longer act without consequence. The stage was set for the decisive moment, when skill, composure, and strategic thinking would confront raw aggression, and the battlefield would reveal its true leader. The dusty air of the training ground seemed to thrum with tension. Soldiers crouched behind obstacles, holding their breath, eyes fixed on General Hale and the unflinching figure of Corporal. Hale's chest heaved, his pistol still gripped tightly, though now his movements were slower, more deliberate. The arrogance that had fueled his initial attacks was beginning to falter, had seized the psychological advantage, and every subtle adjustment she had made in the past minutes had brought her closer to control. The battlefield was no longer chaotic. It was a chessboard, and she was several moves ahead. Hale glared at her, fury simmering behind narrowed eyes, but doubt had crept into his mind. "Do you think you can defy me and survive?" he spat, his voice trembling with both rage and confusion. Didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. Her presence spoke louder than words, calm, precise, and resolute. Every micro-movement of her body communicated strategy and awareness. She had calculated his behavior, anticipated his overconfidence, and positioned herself where she could act decisively while minimizing risk. Her eyes flicked to the scattered soldiers, nodding their positions and readiness. Some were visibly shaken, others inspired by her example, knew she had to act not just for herself, but to protect everyone under her command. Hale's unpredictability made direct confrontation dangerous, but his arrogance made him predictable in ways he could not recognize. Every twitch, every sway, every sudden glare revealed openings, and she had been waiting for this precise moment. Hale shifted forward, pistol raised, assuming that fear would dominate. Subtle adjustment, a slight step to the side, changed her alignment with the sun and shadows. The glare off the metal of his pistol reflected back at him from the wrong angle, momentarily blinding him, however slightly. It was enough. His mind noted the opportunity he had, and now a controlled maneuver could neutralize the immediate threat without risking anyone's life. Her hands moved with deliberate precision. Using the principles of leverage and positioning, she initiated a controlled step forward, maintaining eye contact while subtly angling her body. Hale's eyes widened in surprise, but it was too late. The movement was smooth, deliberate, and precise, designed to force him to react rather than dictate. He stumbled slightly, unbalancing himself against his own momentum. Subtle control of space had transformed the dynamics of the confrontation in a fraction of a second. "General Hale," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "lower your weapon, now." Her tone was measured, authoritative, impossible to ignore. The soldiers froze, sensing the gravity of the moment. Hale's fingers twitched, uncertain whether to obey or lash out. His calculated presence radiated power. He could not anticipate her next move without risking complete exposure, and his rage had blinded him to the subtleties of control. The battlefield had shifted. Hale took another step, but his foot caught on uneven ground, his pistol swinging slightly. Exploited the imbalance, shifting her weight to maximize leverage without physical confrontation. It was a dance of precision, intellect, and timing. Soldiers watched in disbelief as the general, previously unassailable in authority and fear, was subtly forced into a position of vulnerability. His composure had neutralized the threat without a single shot fired from her hands. She had turned the tide purely through awareness, patience, and psychological mastery. Then, with a fluid motion, used her free hand to tap the edge of Hale's weapon, a calculated maneuver that caused the pistol to tilt harmlessly downward. It was precise, non-lethal, and effective. Hale's eyes widened in shock, realizing too late that his arrogance had been exploited. The soldiers around them gasped softly, witnessing the once untouchable general disarmed in a fraction of a second. Strategy had succeeded. She had retained control, protected the unit, and demonstrated the power of calm intelligence against reckless aggression. The training ground fell silent. Hale stood, momentarily frozen, processing the unexpected turn of events. Eyes met his, unwavering, commanding, yet not aggressive. She had not humiliated him publicly, but she had ensured that his authority could no longer intimidate without reason. The contrast was stark, the general's rage versus the medic's calm mastery. Every soldier present felt the weight of the moment, understanding that leadership and courage were not determined by rank or weapon, but by composure, intelligence, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. Crouched slightly, maintaining a defensive posture while keeping Hale in her line of sight. "Your actions have consequences," she said quietly but firmly. "If you fire again, you will not only risk your career but the safety of everyone here. Control comes from skill, not intimidation." Hale's chest heaved, his pride bruised, his ego wounded. For the first time he understood that fear alone did not command respect, and that intelligence coupled with courage could neutralize even the most aggressive threats. The soldiers slowly emerged from cover, emboldened by her leadership. Their respect for her had grown exponentially. She had not acted rashly or violently. She had maintained control, guided the unit, and neutralized danger without harm. Hale's fury, once absolute, had been contained by skill, patience, and presence. His calm decisiveness had rewritten the rules of engagement in this small battlefield, demonstrating that courage, intelligence, and composure could prevail over raw aggression. Hale's lips pressed into a thin line, his pistol lowered slightly as he attempted to regain composure. He knew, even in that moment, that his authority had been undermined. Actions were precise, measured, and effective. She had not only protected herself, but had also prevented potential casualties, inspired the unit, and reasserted the importance of discipline balanced with awareness. The entire scenario had shifted irrevocably. She had turned a potentially lethal confrontation into a lesson of strategy, patience, and moral courage. Finally, exhaled slowly, allowing the tension to dissipate while keeping her eyes on Hale. The general, momentarily silent, recognized the futility of further aggression. The battlefield had changed. Her intelligence, composure, and calculated actions had neutralized his threat, and she had emerged as the undeniable center of authority in that charged moment. Soldiers looked on with awe, inspired not by weaponry, but by the mastery of intellect and courage under extreme pressure. In that pivotal instant, the dynamic of the entire unit shifted. Fear transformed into respect, arrogance confronted intelligence, and chaos was replaced by control. The medic who had been underestimated had not only survived the threat but had demonstrated leadership that surpassed rank, authority, and brute force. The training ground was silent, electric with realization. Hale had been bested, not by violence but by calm, calculated action, proving that skill and courage could neutralize even the most aggressive power. The training grounds were eerily quiet. Dust swirled lazily in the air, disturbed only by the shallow, deliberate breaths of the soldiers who had witnessed the confrontation between General Hale and Corporal. Hale, once the embodiment of arrogance and authority, stood stiffly, his face a mixture of anger, disbelief, and reluctant acknowledgement. He had been unseated not by force, but by intellect, patience, and composure. Every soldier present felt the shift in the atmosphere. The rules of respect and authority had been rewritten, if only for this tense, sun-baked morning. Straightened slightly, still crouched near the concrete barrier, maintaining a vigilant eye on Hale. Her breathing remained controlled, her pulse steady. Though adrenaline still coursed through her veins, her composure was unshakable. The soldiers slowly emerged from their positions, looking to her for guidance. Their eyes held a mixture of awe, gratitude, and quiet admiration. Had not only neutralized a dangerous situation, she had demonstrated leadership in its form, calm, intelligent, and strategic. Hale's hands, still shaking slightly, clenched and unclenched at his sides. His weapon hung lowered, his fury tempered by the undeniable reality of the situation. He had misjudged her entirely. She was a medic. He had assumed she could only react under orders, follow protocol, and remain in a subordinate position, but had proven him wrong. Every calculated movement, every measured breath, every decision had transformed the confrontation from chaos into a display of precise, disciplined control. Hale had been forced to acknowledge, however grudgingly, that authority without skill could falter. The soldiers began murmuring quietly among themselves, sharing glances and nods of approval. Some whispered her name, marveling at how a young medic had maintained composure under the gaze of a general whose temper was infamous. Others silently acknowledged the subtle signals she had used to direct them through the ordeal. His leadership had not relied on loud commands or force. It had been communicated through presence, awareness, and calculated control. This realization resonated deeply with the unit. Courage and intellect could outweigh even the most aggressive displays of authority. Hale's voice broke the silence, low and measured though tinged with frustration. "You handled this well," he admitted reluctantly, his pride wounded but his recognition clear. The admission was sparse, strained, yet meaningful. For the first time he acknowledged that discipline alone did not guarantee authority, that arrogance could blind even the most experienced leaders, and that intelligence and courage could challenge it effectively. His eyes met his, calm yet unyielding. She nodded slightly, neither seeking approval nor confrontation. The acknowledgement was mutual and silent, a recognition of the lessons learned in those tense minutes. Moved deliberately toward the center of the training ground, keeping a careful distance from Hale. She assessed the soldiers around her, ensuring everyone was safe and accounted for. The young medic's composure had inspired confidence, but she understood the responsibility extended beyond surviving the general's outburst. She provided guidance, instructing soldiers to regroup, check equipment, and report any minor injuries from the panic. Her leadership had extended beyond strategy. It had encompassed care, awareness, and the preservation of the unit's cohesion. The atmosphere gradually shifted from tension to reflection. Soldiers exchanged quiet conversations, their admiration for growing. They recognized that her actions had not only ensured safety, but had also demonstrated the qualities of true leadership: courage, intelligence, composure, and tactical awareness. Whispers of her skill and calm authority rippled through the ranks, reaching even those who had doubted her initially. The young medic, underestimated by many, had proven herself not merely competent but exceptional. Hale stepped back, finally lowering his gaze from the tension he had created. His posture was rigid, pride still bruised, but an undeniable respect had begun to form. "You showed skill today that I did not anticipate," he said, his voice quieter, more introspective. The words were few, but they carried weight. In the world of military hierarchy, acknowledgement of competence, especially from a subordinate, was rare and significant. His presence had demanded respect, without compromising her principles or engaging in unnecessary conflict. As the unit reorganized, soldiers gradually returned to positions and duties, though their conversations remained hushed, tinged with awe and newfound respect. Some glanced back at Hale, others at, sensing the profound lesson that had just unfolded. The general's authority, once absolute in their eyes, had been tempered by the intelligence and courage of a medic. The story of the confrontation was already circulating silently among the soldiers, an example of bravery, strategy, and composure prevailing over aggression and arrogance. Aware of the attention, did not seek recognition. She quietly ensured the wounded soldier from earlier was fully stabilized, checking bandages and assessing vital signs. Her calm efficiency reinforced the respect she had earned. Leadership, she knew, was not about ego or dominance. It was about preparation, intelligence, and caring for those under one's charge. Today, she had all three qualities in a high-pressure situation that tested every skill she had cultivated in her career. Hale, observing quietly, seemed to internalize the lessons. His temper had been a liability, but the experience had shown him the value of patience, awareness, and acknowledgement of competence regardless of rank. Soldiers, witnessing the interaction, sensed a subtle shift in their leader's approach. Had done more than survive. She had redefined the parameters of respect and authority within the unit. Fear no longer dictated behavior. Competence, courage, and composure now carried weight. The day's events left a lasting impression. Soldiers who had initially been intimidated by Hale's explosive temper now understood that true leadership was measured by skill, awareness, and calm decision-making. Young, determined, and underestimated, had not only survived the general's aggression, but had become the exemplar of what it meant to lead under pressure. Her calm presence had preserved lives, neutralized threats, and inspired respect. Finally, as the sun climbed higher and shadows stretched across the yard, Hale, signaling the conclusion of the tense exercise. Soldiers returned to routine duties, but the lessons of the morning would linger. Standing with quiet poise became the focal point of a new understanding. Courage tempered by intelligence, composure under pressure, and awareness of the human dynamics of leadership could triumph over arrogance and aggression. The battlefield had tested everyone present, and the outcome had redefined the meaning of authority, respect, and leadership. The medic, once underestimated, had emerged not only unscathed but triumphant. Her actions had demonstrated the enduring power of patience, strategy, and courage in the face of overwhelming intimidation. The soldiers would carry this lesson forward, that leadership was not merely rank or fear, but the ability to act decisively, wisely, and compassionately, even under the most extreme circumstances. The sun had climbed high, casting long shadows across the dusty training grounds. The air still hummed with tension, a lingering reminder of the confrontation that had unfolded mere hours earlier. Soldiers moved with a new sense of awareness, their eyes occasionally flicking toward Corporal. She stood near the center of the yard, calm and composed, her posture confident but not boastful. Though the adrenaline had begun to fade, the aura of command and quiet authority that she exuded remained palpable. Today, the unit had witnessed a lesson in courage, intelligence, and leadership that would resonate far longer than any training exercise. General Hale lingered at the edge of the group, his face still tight with lingering frustration, but tempered by grudging respect. The arrogance that had fueled his outburst earlier had not entirely dissipated, yet he now recognized a truth he had never confronted. Authority without competence was vulnerable, and courage, intelligence, and composure could challenge even the most imposing figures. He studied seeing not just a medic, but a tactician, a strategist, and a leader whose skill had neutralized his rage without violence. Approached the wounded soldier she had tended earlier, checking the bandages and adjusting straps with professional efficiency. "How's your arm?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with genuine concern. The young soldier swallowed nervously, his eyes wide with lingering fear but also awe. "Better, thanks to you," he murmured, offered a reassuring smile and a nod. Her focus remained on the safety and morale of the unit. emphasizing that true leadership extended beyond authority. It required care, awareness, and responsibility. Hale cleared his throat, capturing the attention of everyone present. His voice, though still firm, lacked its previous venom. "Today's events have been a wake-up call," he admitted, glancing at. "I misjudged not only your capability but the nature of leadership itself. Strength is not measured by fear or dominance alone. I've learned that courage and intelligence, exercised with patience and composure, are just as vital." The words were rare from a man known for pride and arrogance, and the soldiers listened closely, absorbing the weight of his acknowledgement. Remained silent, letting his words stand. She did not seek validation or recognition, but she understood the significance. The general's admission, however grudging, marked a transformation in perception. Respect had been earned through action, not rank. The soldiers absorbed the lesson intuitively. Fear had been replaced with admiration. Uncertainty had been replaced with understanding. This demonstration of skill, composure, and strategic thinking had not only preserved safety, but had reshaped the moral and psychological landscape of the unit. Hale took a measured step toward, lowering his gaze slightly. "Corporal," he said, his tone more solemn than commanding, "you handled the situation with a professionalism and intelligence that exceeded expectations. Today, you demonstrated leadership in a way that few can and many should learn from. You've earned my respect." The declaration, though formal, carried weight in the military hierarchy. It was rare for a general to acknowledge the competence of a subordinate so openly, particularly under such high-stakes circumstances. The soldiers around them exchanged glances, a collective sense of pride and inspiration rippling through the ranks. Some whispered quietly, recognizing the significance of what had just transpired. A young medic had not only survived but had emerged as a figure of authority and respect through intellect, composure, and courage. Actions had transcended rank, demonstrating that true leadership was a combination of skill, awareness, and moral fortitude rather than sheer intimidation. Finally addressed the group, her voice calm yet carrying authority. "Everyone did well today," she said, nodding toward the soldiers. "The situation was dangerous, but your attention, discipline, and trust made it manageable. Remember this: leadership is about preparation, awareness, and care for those under your responsibility. Courage and composure matter as much as rank or weaponry." The soldiers absorbed her words, their admiration deepening. Her message was clear. Leadership was learned, observed, and practiced, not simply demanded. Hale studied her carefully, absorbing her statement. He recognized the unspoken truth, had not only neutralized his aggression but had taught him a lesson in humility, patience, and respect. The unit's morale, previously strained by fear and uncertainty, had shifted entirely. Soldiers straightened their postures, glancing between and Hale, recognizing the lesson in courage and competence. The dynamics of the command structure had subtly shifted, emphasizing skill and composure over blind obedience and intimidation. In the hours that followed, the training exercise concluded without further incident. Soldiers performed routine checks and debriefed, but the memory of the confrontation lingered, moved through the ranks, quietly ensuring the well-being of each soldier. Her composure had set a standard. Calm, deliberate, and responsible leadership was more influential than fear or aggression. Hale, observing quietly, appeared reflective. He had experienced firsthand the limits of authority when untempered by skill and intelligence. The story of the confrontation spread through the base in hushed conversations and quiet admiration. Soldiers spoke of courage, her strategic thinking, and her ability to maintain composure under extreme pressure. Even those who had doubted her initially acknowledged her skill. She had redefined what it meant to lead, demonstrating that rank and title were not sufficient to command respect. Only action, intelligence, and courage could. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the yard, took a moment to herself, standing near the center of the grounds. Dust clung lightly to her uniform, yet she remained unruffled, her focus steady. The General Hale approached quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. He did not raise his voice or issue commands. Instead, he nodded, a subtle gesture of recognition. In that simple acknowledgement, a bridge had been built between rank and competence, between authority and respect. Had emerged not only unscathed from the dangerous confrontation, but had transformed it into a teaching moment for the entire unit. Soldiers would carry the memory of her composure, intelligence, and courage forward, inspired to emulate her example. Hale, humbled yet wiser, would remember the day he was challenged, not with aggression but with calm mastery. The events had left a lasting impact, demonstrating that leadership was earned through action, guided by skill, and grounded in responsibility. As the training grounds emptied and shadows lengthened, finally allowed herself a brief exhale. Her work was not done. There would always be training, challenges, and new situations requiring composure and courage. But in that moment, she had proven a profound truth. Intelligence, courage, and composure could confront arrogance, neutralize threats, and command respect without a single act of violence. The unit had witnessed the birth of a true leader, not by rank alone, but by action, strategy, and unshakable presence. The soldiers would remember this day for years to come. General Hale would remember it too. And the medic who had been underestimated had forever changed the understanding of what it meant to lead, protect, and inspire. Her courage had not only preserved lives but had transformed the battlefield into a classroom for leadership, respect, and moral fortitude. The story of her composure under fire would become legend within the unit, a testament to the enduring power of intelligence, patience, and courage.